No president in history has ever wanted to be investigated. No person in history has ever wanted that. But presidents, and I would include Nixon, and I would certainly include Reagan, Bush, and I would include Clinton, all the way up through now, have understood that there does need at times to be some sort of DOJ investigation. It needs to be carried out with some level of independence. Now, various presidents have taken various steps to undermine that, but they've never gotten to the point where Trump is right now of there will be no investigation of me. Anyone who thinks about it will be fired and maybe prosecuted yourself. But the second thing is what Democrats did during the 4 years between Trump's presidencies do not excuse or justify what Trump's doing now. But Democrats don't have clean hands here. There's hypocrisy on the Democratic side also. For all the talk of rule of law and all men are created equal and treated equal under the law, I don't think you can support that in an objective sense when you look back at all of the cases that were brought against Trump.
Welcome to Open Book. I am your host, Anthony Scaramucci. Joining us now is best-selling author, CNN legal analyst, and dear friend, Ellie Honig. You know, Ellie, when you're a lawyer and you pass the bar, you have to take continuing education credits. Yeah. I feel like your books are continuing education for me. I mean, I'm learning more from your books than I did in law school.
Yeah, good.
Go ahead.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. And by the way, I'm going to make a petition to the New Jersey and Pennsylvania bars where I'm admitted that I should get credit. Like I shouldn't have to sit through some webinar. I wrote this book. That should count.
I'm with you. There's a lot of content in here. Okay, so the title of your new book, and you wrote two great books prior to this one, but the title of the new book is When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President from Nixon to Trump. And so obviously we know the other part of that cliche, when you come at the king,
you best not miss.
You better not miss.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you got some great stories in here. So it's always great to have you back on Open Book. You called the special counsels the ultimate test of American justice. Why did you write that? And why did you write this story right now when accountability for presidents, particularly President Trump, it feels more fragile than ever?
So I think there's two reasons, Anthony. First of all, these cases are the most important cases that we've seen in this country over the last half century. I mean, there's a chapter basically for each of the main cases from Watergate to Iran-Contra to Clinton and Ken Starr, all the way up through the Mueller, Hur, Durham, Jack Smith cases. And, we have just come through a period where we've had a glut of these. There was a point where we had 5 of them basically in about a half decade, which was historically unusual. And I thought, well, I think we need to get inside these cases, which I do in this book. I talked to 36 people who were actually involved in the cases, prosecutors, defense lawyers, witnesses, White House officials. And what lesson can we draw from it? And then the second thing, to your point, Anthony, it couldn't have come out at a better time. What we see Donald Trump doing now, day by day basis, even just this past few days when Trump is ordering Pam Bondi, that I want you to indict Letitia James, I don't care really what the evidence is making the point, and this goes to the title of the book, that what the Trump administration is doing now is pure payback. It's retribution. It's when you come at the king, you best not miss. And I don't mean to, and I don't celebrate that. I use this descriptively. In fact, in the book, I argue this is incredibly dangerous. This is a complete misuse of DOJ's prosecutorial power. And really what's happened now is Trump has kicked down the wall of independence that used to define DOJ to keep it what it was.
I feel like, I want to test something on you. I was reading your book and I said, I feel like if Trump had won re-election, we wouldn't be in the trouble that we're in. Hear me out for a second.
In 2020, you mean?
Yeah, he had a lot of Republicans still on the playing field with him. I mean, traditional Republicans. He was still adhering to some basic ideas about the presidency. You wouldn't have had the big insurrection, the January 6th disaster,
right,
which is now in the public lore. We'll call it the insurrection, but it also called into question and made many Americans question their own election integrity, which is exactly what our adversaries would like us to do in the country. I feel like if he just won, he would have served his 4 years very sloppily, lots of Twitter explosions and craziness, and it would have been over.
It's an interesting
now we have this sort of 10-year yoke over us. Am I wrong in thinking
it's
that?
An interesting counterfactual because for two reasons. One, if you compare Trump 2, which we're in now, to Trump 1, there's big differences. I mean, Trump 1, he did a lot of the things that you just talked about, Anthony. And my first book was about Bill Barr, his primary attorney general during those years, his second AG during those years. And, while Trump would have these temper tantrums and say, I want to see, John Kerry indicted. I want to see Barack Obama indicted. Hillary Clinton, Andy McCabe. Maybe you, Anthony. I don't know if he maybe fired one of those at
Well,
you. Wouldn't shock
he
me.
hasn't come for me yet. I'm too much of a piker, but
Right, right,
I think if he wins the midterms, he's going to put some people in jail for sure.
right. So
I think that's the next move.
and that's the
jail
thing.
time for some of these people.
This was talk during the first term, but nobody did it. Bill Barr basically just ignored him, as did others, and nobody was indicted. But now Trump seems like he's serious, and he seems like in Pam Bondi, he has a person who's willing to do it. I think the second part of considering your counterfactual, what if Trump had won in 2020? I mean, yeah, I don't think all these criminal cases, they certainly would not have landed while he was president in this scenario from 2020 up through January of 2025. There wouldn't have been a January 6th. Who knows, with the classified documents, he wouldn't have been a private citizen. So, and I do argue in the book, I want to make clear, like, the book is not some sort of anti-Trump screed. I'm critical of Trump and the way he's done this, but I'm also not afraid to be critical in the book of some of the things that were done to get Donald Trump. The Jack Smith chapter has some criticisms of Merrick Garland and Jack Smith. I don't argue that they were acting, in the same way that Trump is, but their hands are not clean either. There were things that they did that were inappropriate, that were clearly designed to go after Trump in a way you would not have gone after a normal person.
So that brings the hypocrisy question. Again, these are questions I've been dying to ask you since I closed the book. So we rail on free speech, unless you're saying something that we like, Democrats and Republicans. Great op-ed today in the New York Times about that. Additionally, we don't want you to pick winners. I mean, we don't want you to tell you who's going to be the TikTok investors, but yet Democrats make an investment in Solyndra. It goes to zero. And there's whataboutisms now on both sides where, they go after each other in a way that I don't think they previously went after each other. Maybe I'm wrong. You point out Nixon, you give up other situations, the Iran-Contra, things like that. Right. But it just seemed like it was tamer, Ellie, or was I just younger and more naive?
No,
or you tell me.
It was different. I mean, it used to be that, and again, I talked to Watergate prosecutors, Iran-Contra prosecutors, both sides of the Clinton Starr case. It used to be, look, no president in history has ever wanted to be investigated, right? No person in history has ever wanted that. But presidents, and I would include Nixon, and I would certainly include Reagan, Bush, and I would include Clinton, all the way up through now, have understood that there does need at times to be some sort of DOJ investigation. It needs to be carried out with some level of independence. Now, various presidents have taken various steps to undermine that, but they've never gotten to the point where Trump is right now of, there will be no investigation of me. Anyone who thinks about it will be fired and maybe prosecuted yourself. But the second thing is, and I think what Democrats did during the 4 years between Trump's presidencies do not excuse or justify what Trump's doing now. But Democrats don't have clean hands here. There's hypocrisy on the Democratic side also. For all the talk of rule of law and all men are created equal and treated equal under the law, I don't think you can support that in an objective sense when you look back at all of the cases that were brought against Trump. I mean, before we get into the criminal stuff, the Letitia James case, look, I don't think Letitia James should be indicted now. I don't think there's a case there. Todd Blanche doesn't think there's a case there. But her lawsuit against Trump was ridiculous. And I said this many times, Anthony, publicly, I'm sure probably with you. She ran for office on Vote for Me and I'll nail Trump. She goes, I don't know what, something, I'll sue him, I'll indict him for money laundering. She brings this ridiculous lawsuit. And just the other day, a liberal appeals court in New York throws out the whole financial penalty for exactly the reasons I was saying. There was no real victim. So now he's still liable, but the financial penalty has been zeroed out now. That's quite a rebuke. I think the Alvin Bragg hush money case was ridiculous. It certainly backfired politically. I think that'll get thrown out. And I think if you look at, I'm not even going to talk about Fonnie Willis. That case was a joke and sidetracked itself. And then even if you look at Jack Smith, there are things that he did that you would never have done to anyone else. I'll give you one example. Jack Smith indicts Trump on January 6th, as he should have, in my view. But then Smith says, now Smith's up against this mad dash against the clock because he wants to try Trump before the 2024 election. But the problem is DOJ wasted so much time. It took him 2.5 years to indict this guy. So Jack Smith says, I want to try him 5 months from the indictment. 5 months from the indictment, Anthony. This is a case with $13 million pages of discovery. There is no physical way Donald Trump could exercise his right to effective defense counsel. They could not have gone through 13 million pages in 5 months. The average case, I looked this up in DC, your average gun drug case gets 2 years and 4 months, 28 months to prep for trial. And Jack Smith made a straight face argument. He needs to go to trial within 5 months. The reason was the election, of course, but he wouldn't say it. And so there was some disingenuousness and hypocrisy from Democrats as well. Now, that doesn't justify Trump firing back 10 times greater as he's doing now, but Dems can't claim clean hands here either.
So was Archibald Cox, was he at Harvard Law School when you were there, or he had already left?
Are you kidding? Archibald Cox was like taught in the 70s. I was born in 75.
Okay. No, Archibald Cox was there when I was
maybe
there.
he went back. I guess he went back. You're right.
Yeah, he went back.
Actually,
back.
I take back my little laugh there. He might have been there in 2000 when I was there. I don't know. Yeah, you're right.
All right, well, anyway, he was there when I was there. He gave a big speech about the Saturday Night Massacre. So for the young listeners that don't know who even Archibald Cox is, tell us who Archibald Cox is. You wrote great stories about him and what is known as the Saturday Night Massacre. Tell us what that is.
There's so much great color. So Archibald Cox gets brought in under political, Nixon's under political fire. He agrees to bring in Cox as the as the special prosecutor for Watergate. And I talked to two people who were on Cox's team. They were 30 and 26 at the time. Now they're in their 70s and 80s. Jill Wine-Banks and Jim Quarles. Cox was this venerated Harvard Law professor. Quarles had been his student. And the investigation was starting to make real inroads towards Nixon. And then on this Saturday night in October of 1973, he orders his AG, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. Richardson refuses. The deputy AG refuses. William Ruckelshaus, they both resign. So you lose your top two officials. And then Cox gets fired anyway. So those three all get decapitated. Jill Wine-Banks tells me a great story that I have in the book about how she experienced the Saturday Night Massacre. She was at a wedding. She said she couldn't get a day off for weeks and months at a time. Finally, that Saturday, she got to go to New York City for a family wedding. She comes back at midnight. This is before the era of phones. The desk clerk jumps out and hands her a message that says, "The office has been seized. Return immediately." So next morning, she goes down. It's a Sunday morning now. She's there. Quarles is there. The other prosecutors are there. And they don't know what's going on. They don't know. They know Archibald Cox has been fired, but they don't know if, are we fired? Is this continuing? And they're all sort of sitting there. The office has actually been roped off with police tape. And Cox comes in. I guess they let him back in. They never let him back in now. But at the time, they let him back in, I guess, to clear out his desk or something. And he comes into the prosecutors and he tells them, don't give him what he wants, meaning Nixon. You stay here and you finish the job. Robert Bork comes in. Robert Bork gets blamed a lot of times. I think it's unfair. I think actually Robert Bork was a hero in this because he stopped the bleeding and he made sure Leon Jaworski got appointed. A lot of the historians I spoke to actually agree with me. Jaworski becomes a special counsel and then ultimately leads to the subpoena, the Supreme Court case, and Nixon resigns. So, the Saturday Night Massacre, it's sort of miraculous, but because of the integrity and the courage of these prosecutors, the case carried on and led to Nixon's resignation. I'll tell you real quick, Anthony, a funny story that they told me that's in the book. There was a restaurant, which apparently is still there in D.C., across the street from their offices, which were near DuPont Circle, called Archibald's. And one day, Archie Cox, again, this very starched, patrician guy, says, "We should go to lunch there. That place is named after me. It's called Archibald's. That's my name." And they're like, "Yeah, Archie, that's a strip club. I don't think we should go there." So
he should have gone there. It would have probably loosened him up a little bit. He was pretty uptight. When I was there. The interesting thing about Bork, this predated you a little, but when I was in school, constitutional law scholar Professor Lawrence Tribe was battling to block Robert Bork from getting on the court.
Yeah,
he was nominated by Ronald Reagan, and they successfully blocked him. From getting on the court.
Well, and part of what was used against him, part of it was his ideology was deemed too extreme, but his involvement in Watergate. And I'll tell you something about the book. So we commonly look at Bork as the villain of the Saturday Night Massacre, right? The guy who came in and carried out Nixon's order. But if you do the research, both the AG, Elliot Richardson, and the deputy AG, both guys who resigned later, years later, said, "Oh, no, we asked Bork to do that. We begged him to stay because we knew the bloodletting had to stop at some point." There was actually no chain of command within DOJ after Bork. Bork had nothing to do with Watergate until this. And Bork felt misled later. And I asked Garrett Graff, who's a great Watergate historian, and he said, "No, I agree with you. I think Bork is misremembered. I think he was a hero." And I will tell you, since the book came out, I got a note from Robert Bork's son who said basically, I thank you. Like, I feel like our father has not been remembered correctly through history. So, Bork was like this gruff guy with the goatee and everything, and he had very sharp conservative views. But when it comes to Watergate, he's miscast as the villain.
But it's the early stages of villainization in our society, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we do to each other. We two-dimensionalize people, Ellie, and we go hard. And so the left-wing media went hard at him. The right-wing media goes hard at George Soros.
Yeah.
Listen, I've been on Wall Street for 37 years, Ellie. George Soros was always looked up to on Wall Street.
Yeah.
You know who worked for George Soros? Scott Bessent, Stephen Mnuchin, Stanley Druckenmiller.
So interesting, yeah.
Yeah, they all went to work
It just
for him.
becomes a buzzword. They just say the word Soros. And,
because he went against Cheney during the Iraqi war, and so the conservatives said, we're going to do to George Soros what the hard left did to Robert Bork.
Yeah. I mean, and look, there's a verb
they
now.
Villainize and demonize.
If you look at the Urban Dictionary, to get borked is actually a word now. It means basically to get demonized in that way. Yeah.
All right. Well, if I'm going to get borked, I'm going to wear protection, Ellie. Okay. I just want to let you know that. Okay. Let's go to what Robert Ray said to you. Everyone loves the idea of an outside prosecutor until one gets appointed at them.
Right.
So what a true line, right? I mean, so evidential in your book.
Yeah. So look,
because these guys are like, we're going to have a special prosecutor. And then when it starts picking and probing at them, they flip out.
I mean, Bill Clinton signed the final reauthorization of the independent counsel law in 94. George H.W. Bush, I have in the book, actually told the guy he had just beaten 2 years before, actually said to him, I would not recommend signing that. Like, this law is a problem. And Clinton, I don't know if he wanted to or not, but he obviously felt like he had no choice. And what ends up happening, he becomes the receiving end of the whole Ken Starr thing. But I certainly do not argue in this book that special counsels or independent counsels are perfect. They're highly, vastly imperfect. A lot of this book is exposing that. But I also think we do need some sort of mechanism in place so we don't end up with no check on the president like we have now. Bob Ray is an interesting figure because he ends up replacing Ken Starr. Ken Starr starts off with Whitewater, which is just these real estate deals in Arkansas. He's not getting anywhere. He gets some people around the Clintons, but not the Clintons themselves. And I talked to David Kendall in the book, who represented Bill Clinton, and Lanny Brewer, who was a White House lawyer at the time. And they both said he was just hanging on, waiting for something. And then Monica Lewinsky emerges like manna from heaven for him. I actually also talked to a guy named Saul Weisenberg, who was Ken Starr's number 2. Starr died a few years ago. And Saul was very candid. He said, I was on a detail that was supposed to run out in February of 98. And I felt like we were playing out the string. But the Monica stuff hit in January of 98. And I thought, now I'm going to stick around. This is getting good. So, of course, it all spins vastly out of control, becomes an impeachment, becomes ridiculous. They're horrible. Both sides are horrible in their treatment of Monica Lewinsky. And it ends up basically killing the independent counsel law because both sides hated it. I mean, Clinton survives the impeachment. He leaves with a record high approval rating. Democrats hate it. Republicans hate it. And it lapses. But anyway, Bob Ray takes over the case at the very end, the last year or so. And he was in an interesting position because by this point, everyone was done with this case. The impeachment was over. And Bob said to me, but we still had a problem. We had to decide if we're going to prosecute Bill Clinton for perjury. And I said, you're kidding me. There's no way you would have indicted him. Bob goes 95% of the way in the book to saying that he would have if he had to. He said to me, all the pieces were in place. But Bill, he ends up having this, and I detail this in the book, a dramatic not one-on-one, but face-to-face meeting with Clinton in the map room of the White House, like 20 days before Clinton leaves office, and says, we need you to admit that you were untruthful. We need you to pay a fine, and we need you to lose your bar license. And basically, Clinton agrees to that on his last day in office. But Bob Ray basically makes clear to me that if Clinton had not agreed to that, he would have indicted. And I said, Bob, you would have lost. You would have lost in 2 seconds. And he goes, maybe, but I felt like I was going to do what I have to do. But Bob understands that the idea of a special counsel is lovely in theory until you're on the receiving end of one.
So let me ask you this, because I've another big question for me. The presidential immunity case. Would Nixon, under that ruling, have gotten in trouble?
Ooh, see, I love that question because what I argue in the book is the ruling is very broad and vague, and it no question will make it harder for people in the future to prosecute presidents. but there still is conduct that can be prosecuted. And I think my argument would be what Nixon did there would be prosecutable, because he was in on, to some extent, the break-in. He knew of it, or he knew of it shortly thereafter. He was in on the cover-up, but that's political. If your political arm is committing crimes or whatever, that's pretty clearly, even that is outside the scope of the immunity ruling. It would be a little oddly, it would probably be worse conduct, but actually more within the immunity ruling if he was using his own cabinet members or federal executive branch officials to commit these crimes. But the fact that he was doing it with private citizens engaged in political activity, so that's a great example. Like, some people say no president could ever be prosecuted again. I don't think that's true. I think if you really look at the immunity opinion, there is plenty of conduct that can still be prosecuted. I do argue in the book that the immunity decision went way too far, but I also argue that doesn't mean everyone should just give up on accountability for all time.
I've heard, and I want you to react to this. I've heard that the Supreme Court's afraid of Trump. I've heard that Roberts is worried that he's going to render a decision against Trump, and Trump is going to flip him the bird, and he's going to get no support from the Congress or other elements of the government. Do you think that that's bogus?
I don't buy that. I don't think the Supreme Court is loves Trump. You'll hear something, these guys. I mean, maybe Alito and Thomas, but no, I mean, there's very little Trump can do to them. The only thing he could really do is defy one of their orders and sort of bring us into this crisis moment. But he's had chances to do that. And while he has defied the spirit of some of the orders, including those early immigration orders, he hasn't quite stepped over the line of overtly defying an explicit order from the Supreme Court. So I don't think they're afraid of him. I think I can understand they're concerned he might do that, but I don't think they're pulling punches or doing him favors because of that.
All right, I just want to throw that out.
Look,
there.
They rule against him a lot. They rule against. There's this notion out there of they're always they've ruled against Trump quite a bit.
Give me one example where they ruled against him.
Several of the immigration cases where they said you have to give people due process that he wasn't giving. Some of the firing cases and the withholding of federal funding cases, they've said you can't do that. They ruled against him on his tax returns when he got subpoenaed for his tax returns. They refused to block Jack Smith from releasing his special counsel report. Like, there's a lot. I mean, he's done well with the Supreme Court, but it's not like he's gone undefeated with them or they've always sided with him. By the way, I should say, I know you're financially focused. I believe they're going to strike down the tariffs too. That's coming up in November.
So you're reading my mind because I'm dying to ask you that question. So
this is not investment advice. Let me make clear. So I don't, but I think that case, we know the Supreme Court is expediting and hearing it in November. I think they'll probably rule by the new year, right around then. And Trump has lost the first two rounds of this in the district court and the Court of Appeals. And I think what Trump has done in passing these tariffs actually violates conservative principles, because Congress holds tariff power, not the president. If Congress is going to delegate a power like that, they can, but they have to do it clearly and unambiguously in a statute. And this statute that Trump has used, the IEPA, the Emergency Economic Powers Act, International Economic Emergency Powers Act, A, arguably doesn't cover tariffs at all, and B, isn't specific enough. So I think if you use traditionally conservative legal principles, he loses. I mean, definitely the three liberals will be against him because they always are, almost no matter what. And I think he's going to lose at least two of the conservatives. If I had to guess, don't invest based on this, folks. I know a lot of you wealthy Wall Street people will listen to Anthony, but if I had to guess, I would guess it's going to get struck down.
Okay, but Ellie, that's big consequences to that. That means there's $1 trillion or so of tax revenue, because that's all tariffs are. I mean, the president is telling the biggest lie of lies. He says all the countries are paying the tariffs.
No, it's the importers.
The consumer is paying the tariffs.
Well, the importers pay it and pass it to the consumer. Yeah,
of course. Yeah, of course. It's a consumption tax. Yeah. We both know this. Yeah. So what happens? They have to return the money to the people that they
So I think the answer is that the importers can actually try to recover the money they've paid. Yes. There is some case law on
But on a going forward basis, the tariff nonsense, him coming down from evil Mount Evil with the like Orange Moses
Right, I
with
know
the
the
tablet.
tablets.
All of that stuff's going away then.
Yeah, I mean, there are some tariffs that are separate from the ones he announced on Liberation Day back in April. There are some on certain types of raw materials and things that could stay in place because he's done them under different legal guidance, legal authority. But those whole Liberation Day tariffs, if the Supreme Court strikes them down, they're all dead. So, I'm sure the financial industry and markets will be watching that case more than probably any case in a long time.
The market's not set up for that, just so you know. The market expects the Supreme Court to rule with them.
Oh, is that right?
So, yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's how the market's acting. I mean, that's my prediction.
Okay.
I hope you're right. I think it's been insanely stupid to do this.
Yeah.
So, are you more optimistic or more pessimistic and cynical about America and holding the powerful to account after writing this book?
I think I'm more optimistic than the average person, right? I mean, I think a lot of people have sort of gone to the point of no one's ever going to be held accountable. But I think if it's done in a measured and fair way, I propose a policy at the end of this, a way we can sort of change the way we structure these special counsel cases to yield better results and more permanency. But I think we can still hold people to account. I think Trump has defied the rules in a lot of ways, has defied the normal laws of gravity. I also think some of the Democratic missteps and oversteps, this is really the subject of my second book, undermine the effort to bring him to justice. The second book I wrote in 2022, while all these Trump cases were about to get started, I said he's in the book, basically, he's going to get indicted probably more than once. And everyone's telling you he's going to go to jail and the walls are closing in, but it's not going to be as easy as you think. And here's why. And that ended up all being true. But I still do think we can, it's not going to happen. Look, let's be real. It's not like this administration over the next 3 years is going to have some sudden epiphany and go, oh yeah, we need to allow for better accountability. But this book is largely a pitch to whoever comes next, be it a Republican or Democrat, J.D. Vance or, Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or whoever, that this can work. We can have, and we do have a history, not a perfect history, but a history of meaningful accountability through this idea of special counsel or outside prosecutors. There's things we need to do to change it, but I'm not ready to give up on accountability for all time.
All right. So you've done this podcast before. I've got 5 words I want to present to you, and I want you to react to them. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
I say the word Nixon. You say what?
I can respond in more than one word.
Yeah, of course.
Got meaningful accountability imposed on him because of brave prosecutors.
Clinton.
Abused his power, mistreated Monica Lewinsky, but ultimately was over-pursued by Ken Starr.
Okay. Joe Biden.
Biden was fairly exemplary when it came to his respect for the independent Justice Department until he pardoned his own son and blamed politics in a Trumpian statement. I think that pardon undermined Joe Biden's legacy. After telling us for months he would do no such thing because he respected the justice system. Yeah.
And that was probably not an auto pen pardon. Let's put it that way. All right. How about Trump?
Has gotten away with almost everything and will redefine the way that we look at the justice system and accountability from here on.
Yeah, and Democrats, trust me, there will be ambitious Democrats that take advantage of and study Trump's playbook. Yeah. So, all right, let's go to the last 2 words, special counsel. You say what?
Imperfect, but better than any other system and can be improved.
Yeah, I learned that from you, actually. I didn't really understand the mechanisms of it, but you have to do that. I guess I'm wondering if the whole Justice Department at this point should be a special counsel, meaning
well, look,
should it get moved out of the executive branch? I don't know where you put it. I'm not saying you could put it in the judicial branch, but you got to get it away from the powers that be, particularly if they have to examine at times the powers that be.
And that's sort of my proposal with respect to special counsel, that it needs to be more insulated, but you also can't be politically unaccountable. We can't have prosecutors doing whatever they want with no consequence. But there are models for that. And I will tell you, I pulled it from not only scholarly articles, but from these people. Like I asked the lawyers, the players, what rules do you think worked and didn't work, and what would you like to see happen? But I agree with you. I would like to see some sort of, you can't pull it out of the executive branch entirely, but I would like to see it more independent, more insulated.
Well, listen, the book is awesome. When you come at the king, inside DOJ's pursuit of the president, from Nixon to Trump. I'm sorry I don't have the book in front of me. I would also hold it. Hold it up, Ellie. Hold it up. Hold the book up. I was looking for the book this morning, but I have it at home.
There you go.
And love the book.
Thank
It's from
you.
Ellie Honig. Thank you so much for joining us once again on Open Book.
Great to see you, Anthony. Thank you very much.
We are famously a country of people who fled from other places for a variety of reasons. In America, there's always been an affinity toward the rebel soul. That's certainly true of the Irish. I think it's probably also true of the Southern Italians as well. I also think that there's a wish fulfillment that we all have. You've got a big problem. It'd be nice to go to some guy with a white cat on his lap and have him take care of it. You want to get that ticket fixed. There's the noisy neighbor. Sometimes there's far more serious problems that, thank God, most of us don't take those solutions. So I think there's a wish fulfillment. There's a part of us, let's be honest, that would like to. And so I think that reading about people who do it is on some level attractive.
Joining us now on Open Book is Don Winslow, who is an international best-selling author and is writing a new crime trilogy, which is absolutely fabulous. The second book is out last week, City of Dreams. It is the sequel to City on Fire, but previous bestsellers include The Border, The Cartel, Savages. Don, a long time ago, I met you at one of those premieres. Oliver Stone had invited me. I took my daughter with me. It was a pretty intense movie. My daughter was yelling at me. She was probably 17 at the time. She got mad at me. But you don't need an introduction. You've written over 25 novels. You've won pretty much every award. You're also a former safari guide and a private investigator. So you've had this amazing life experience. How did you transition all of this into becoming a novelist, sir?
Anthony, I've always wanted to be a novelist since I was about 6 years old, but it took the world a while to agree with that assessment, and nobody stamps your passport to become a writer. So I just did a lot of other things that you alluded to, but all the time writing, trying to keep it up. My goal was to write 5 pages a day, no matter what. I wrote on buses, trains, tents, Buddhist monasteries in China when I was leading hiking trips up there, all over the place. I finally had a book. The first 15 publishers disagreed, but finally the 16th hit me and I was on my way.
So, first of all, I love your writing style, so I want to talk a little bit about that before we get into the specific book. You tap into a vein of human emotion and understanding about how human beings actually are. We present ourselves to the world a certain way in the terms of the way we would like people to see us.
Yeah.
But there's a seemliness to all of us. I mean, let's just face it. There's truth to all of that. There's a carnal nature to all of us. Why are you so good at that? What is your gift, sir?
Well, again, thanks. I don't know that I have a gift. I think I've worked at it. I spent 15 years on and off as a private investigator. Working all kinds of cases, from arson cases through homicide, fraud, child sexual abuse. You get to know if you will, the darker side of people in that regard. You get to know that most people are neither all good or all bad, but the famous shades of gray. The way I view my job is to bring the reader into worlds that he or she couldn't otherwise enter. And the way that I try to do that is to see it through those person's eyes, through the character's eyes, and that requires not objectivity, but subjectivity. I'm not trying to be objective when I'm writing a character. I'm trying to portray their point of view, however distasteful at times we might find that.
It's and I appreciate it, and it's one of the reasons why I love reading your books. So you've been working on this trilogy for 28 years. Mm-hmm. Take us back to the initial inspiration. The funny part about this is a year ago, I was steeped in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And the reason was one of my kids was in school and they were reading it. I was a classic minor at Tufts. So I had read the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Oresteia, all the plays of Sophocles, the Clytemnestra. I know what happened to Agamemnon's daughter at Iphigenia. I can take you through all that stuff because it was my studenthood at
Wow.
Tufts.
Yeah.
But when I was reading your book, I said, okay, I've got to figure out who is who in the book. Okay, I figured out quickly that Danny was Aeneas, and obviously Liam was Paris, and we can go through the different characters.
Sure.
But why? What caused you to use the Homeric epic
Yeah.
poem as the subtext for this?
Yeah, unlike you, it was not my minor or my major in college. I majored in, of all things, African history. So I had this very kind of narrow education. Later in life, though, I decided to try to educate myself and go to the classics. And early on, obviously, you hit the Iliad and the Odyssey. Uh, it struck me so forcefully, Anthony, the similarities between incidents in those classics and real life crime incidents that I grew up with growing up in Rhode Island. And so I started to wonder, could I write a trilogy that would stand alone as a crime saga, that you could read without any reference to the classics at all, but at the same time that tracked the stories and the characters and the themes of those great classics, because I was so fascinated with them. You mentioned the Oresteia, uh, that's a noir plot. If you just look at it, you put a trumpet behind that and put it in black and white, you've got a noir movie. Guy comes home from the war. His wife blames him for their daughter's death, as you alluded to. They kill him in the bathtub, she and her lover. The son comes home and kills them in revenge. Absolutely noir. And so that launched this 28-year odyssey, no pun intended, to try to accomplish that.
I'm obviously, I did the DNA test. I'm 87% Southern Italian,
Okay.
and apparently I'm about 13% Greek. Of course, my mother says that has to be from your father's side.
Right.
But
She's going
the
to
Greeks,
deny
the
that.
Italians,
Yeah.
but this area that you're talking about is laden with Irish and Italian immigrants.
Hmm.
The underworld is in Rhode Island. There's a major underworld in Boston and New York, and some parts of Philly, but Rhode Island really has a undercurrent of the
Yeah.
underworld.
Yeah.
You grew up with this, so how much of this is based on your real life experience?
Experience would be an exaggeration, I think. I was a kid. I grew up around it. I knew some of these guys. They were always around. Rhode Island, as you know, is about the size of a Walmart parking lot, and I've always thought that the state motto should be "I know a guy." Because
You
everybody.
wrote that. I
I
think
think I
that
put that
City
in the
on
book.
Fire.
Yeah, I
City on
think that
Fire. I think you put "I know a guy" in there,
I
which
think
made
that's
me
in
laugh
there.
because we all know a guy from the neighborhood I grew up in.
Right, exactly. So, it was always around. Listen, I mean, I grew up we're not Italian, but I grew up in an Irish Italian neighborhood. My parents used to joke we were the only family, in 5 blocks that didn't have a vowel at the beginning or the ends of their names. And so I was very familiar with the culture, and loved it, loved both of those cultures. And so Danny Ryan, the protagonist of this, look, I've known the likes of Danny my whole life. I played hockey with them, surfed, went to the beach, went to the bars. So this was really familiar to me.
You the beginning of the book captures everybody's imagination. The first sentence is Danny Ryan watches the woman come out of the water like a vision emerging from his dreams of the sea. That's in City of Fire, of course. That's the first book, and this
Yeah,
is the precursor to City of Dreams, which we'll get to. But that is he's describing Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman
correct.
in the world,
Right.
and of course she has her misfiring. Helen, the famous Helen, she leaves with Paris. She breaks off with her husband
Hmm.
Menelaus, the brother of the king of Greece,
Hmm.
of at least the Federation of Kingdoms,
Right.
and she leaves for Troy. And so this is sort of the mix-up that happens. The
Yeah.
Italians think she's dating one of the Italian princes,
Hmm.
mafia princes, but she ends up with Liam, who's pretty self-centered,
Yep.
like our famous Paris from years ago.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about this. Um, Danny wants an ordinary life, but he's
Mhm.
not allowed to have one, is he?
No, no, and that's all he wants. Danny's a pretty normal guy, and he just wants normal, but he wasn't born into that. His mom abandons him when he was 2 weeks old. By the way, the same as Aphrodite abandoned Aeneas. He's left with his very alcoholic and distant father. Uh, his extended family is this Irish crime family, but all he wants is his wife and his kid in a home somewhere. But the conflict between the two mobs takes over. He ends up being a soldier, and then eventually, not to give too much away, a leader in a losing war.
You write about him, and I don't want to give away the plot because it's just so enjoyable. But I want to talk more generally about life. We're planning our lives, Don, and then other things happen to us, right? We're expecting something to happen, and then we get punched in the face, as like Mike Tyson says, or you're making plans, God's laughing.
Right.
Your book is really about this, isn't it? Isn't the Iliad, when you think about the guidebook that the Iliad is, or the guidebook that City on Fire or City of Dreams happens to be, it's about unplanned lives and your reaction to that. Is that fair to say? Is that true for all of us?
Yeah, I think it's true for all of us. I think it's absolutely fair to say you're the first person actually who's picked up on that I've talked to about these books. They're, as were Greek and Roman literature, largely about fate, largely about our arguments, if you will, with the gods, and what happens to us in our life and how we literally in those classics get blown from place to place, with no control. I always think about this, when we're making prognostications on politics or the future or even sports, we always kind of think we know what's going to happen based on what has happened. And then something just comes out of the sky, whether it's COVID or whatever, and changes everything. And that's certainly what happens to Danny. He's laying on that beach. It's a beach I grew up on. That first sentence, by the way, hasn't changed in 28 years. And he sees this woman come out of the water, and he sort of unconsciously knows nothing's ever going to be the same.
Right. There you go. And that's how our lives go. Certainly that happened to us with COVID. The Godfather, The Sopranos, Goodfellas. It's hard to make a gangster story fresh these days. You also, I went back and looked at some of your interviews. I think you or one of the journalists compared The Godfather to Henry IV, which is a Shakespearean play. And so I actually did not catch that and I've read The Godfather 5 times. So I had to go back and read Henry IV. And of course it's right there. All of the hidden totems are in there. You also said that there's about 12 or so storylines that we have in life that we have a tendency to remanufacture. So how did you make this so fresh and so compelling given that?
Man, again, thank you. That's why it took 28 years, because I kept failing at it, Anthony. I doubted my ability to do it for a long time. And for a long time, I was right about that, because I wasn't getting it done. The issue was trying to figure out what are the modern equivalents of these ancient events. You can't have a Trojan horse being pulled into Providence. I don't know who, Aphrodite, a Greek goddess, would be in Providence, Rhode Island in 1988. And so it was a matter of trying to find the very modern and very human aspects of those stories to try to make it fresh. I had a test. I would reread a chapter after I thought it was finished. And if you could read it with no reference to the classics at all, then it passed and I put it in the book. But if I couldn't, if I thought, this does not making sense without reference to the Iliad or the Odyssey, then it had to be rewritten.
All right. So I'm going to test myself here with the very famous Don Winslow. Okay. Sal in the book is Achilles.
Yep.
Pat is Hector.
Yes.
Okay. Danny is Aeneas.
Yes.
Liam is Paris.
Yes.
Okay. Who is Odysseus in this book?
Chris Palumbo.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, Anthony, if you want, when we're off the air, I'll send you the whole key. I have a key of every character in all three
if
books.
you don't mind, I would enjoy that actually, because I am
Yeah.
I think you figured out that I'm an aficionado of the classics, and I've read all of these.
Apparently.
And it's important. Like I teach my kids. I force my son, who absolutely hated me for it. I forced him to take a course on Dante
Wow.
Alighieri.
Wow.
I forced him to read all 3 books.
Yep.
And there was a professor at Tufts, who's a very famous professor. He went to Tufts after me. I said, you got to take this course. And he hated me for it. And he's now about 10 years out of school.
Yep.
And I was in his apartment, and he had the Inferno open.
Oh my gosh.
And he had it earmarked. And I said,
wow.
what is this? He says, well, I'm going back into the Inferno because of Dante's description of human beings and what human beings are actually really like, and what the layers are of the human beings. You know, you mentioned Dante in book 1,
Yep.
The 7th circle of hell. You had that spot for certain people. Of course, we know the 9th circle is where Judas and Brutus lived, the betrayer of the state and God.
Exactly.
They live on that frozen lake with, your legacy. If I got to ask you, this is a little bit of a weird question, but I'm thinking about this as it relates to Don Winslow. You are doing something, at least I think, one of your legacies will be you're a great storyteller, but I think there's something else here. Your legacy is you're taking these stories and you're making them contemporary, and there's a message in these stories. I think I know what the message is, but I want to hear the message from you. It is about the unplanned life. It is about fate, but there's something else going on. So what is it, Don?
I think it's about sin, if you will, if you still believe in that concept, and the possibility of redemption. I think, listen, I was raised Catholic, sort of the Irish branch of that. I think that, however you feel about that later in life, you never leave it, really.
You know what the Italians say about the Irish, right? I mean, they took the Catholicism way more seriously. I mean, when we were kids growing up, you guys were doing everything,
Yeah.
We were half faking it most of the time,
Right. Well, you know what I say about the Irish? Looking forward to our next defeat.
Yeah, you said that. I think that was in book 1 as well. Yeah. That was
but I think that there's always that thought about, what have I done? Should I have done it? And if I did it and it was wrong, can I ever come back? Can you find forgiveness? But I think that the major question of crime fiction, and maybe the major question in my fiction, without getting too heavy about this, is the question, how do you live decently in an indecent world?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and ultimately, where are your morals? Or if they're not coming from God, is there something internally about yourself that's going to allow you to have certain morals? So,
and can you navigate that world that often, is not always that easy of, black and white and what's right or wrong?
Yeah, no question. So I have a lot of young listeners, and so hopefully we'll get a group of young listeners introduced to your books, and not only these two, but others. But for the young listeners, the Aeneid is an interesting book because Augustus didn't like the idea that the Greeks had these 2 wonderful tomes, the Iliad and the Odyssey, several thousand years old. And so he went to Virgil, who was his, poet laureate, if you will. He was really the government's poet. He was always pissed at Ovid. If you remember the Acts of Love,
I do.
He banished Ovid. He didn't like the immorality in the Acts of Love or the Metamorphoses, but he liked Virgil. I mean, he had ups and downs with Virgil, and he said, you have to create a epic about Rome.
Right.
And so he tied it back to Troy. And so I have to ask you this question, because when I read the Iliad, the Trojans seem more valorous than the Greeks. The Trojans, particularly Hector, has more of a moral integrity to his personality. There's a scene in your book where I guess the Hector figure is Pat. His kid is frightened of him. It's very famous in the Iliad as well.
From the Iliad, yes.
But I guess the question I have for you related to this is there a tome for America? We know now there's a tome for the Greek civilization. There's a tome for the Roman civilization. If you said it's 1,000 years from now, Don, and somebody was looking back at the American era, is there a piece of literature that you could look to and say, well, that's going to get to the pantheon of the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Aeneid?
I don't know if there is an epic. I think if we look at a trilogy by John Dos Passos,
Hmm.
the 49th Parallel,
Yep.
and the two books that surround it, might be the closest to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I think in
Hmm.
terms of sort of larger history of a certain era, if I were to look at certain American authors that I think best describe in a way our history and culture, it would be the late Jim Harrison.
Sure.
And I think one of the most underrated novels ever, The Road Home. And also maybe the collective writings of Richard Russo,
Sure.
who I think's written, about a certain aspect of America, the sort of Northeast small town,
Hmm.
But I think those
Did
would
you
be
did,
my,
did you
a
ever
lot of
read
people would,
Winesburg, Ohio?
of course,
Yep.
sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. And a lot of people would, I think, talk about Philip Roth,
Yep.
you know. But for me, I think that Dos Passos and Russo and Harrison really stand out. But in terms of a fictional work that would be analogous to the Iliad or the Odyssey or the Aeneid, I don't think that there is one. And I think there
Yeah.
was something about epic poetry
Hmm.
that's so particular and so specific. And as you alluded to, I mean, the Aeneid was basically written for political purposes,
Yes.
to justify the Augustan reign,
Yep.
and it certainly did that.
Yeah, but it's interesting, because Virgil in his off writings from the Aeneid,
Yeah.
why did he pick Troy? Again, one he felt was valorous, the other one was being driven by ego.
Yeah.
Achilles, Agamemnon, the rivalry, the wrath of Achilles, ultimately him
Right.
not fighting. I don't want to give away too much of this book, but this book, the second book, is equally phenomenal because he's now your protagonist, who is Danny. He's now transforming. There's some tragedy that he's had to face in his life. He's
Hmm.
had the crimes and the situation that happened to him in Providence, and now he's seeking an escape.
Hmm.
The same way Aeneas was running through the tunnels of Troy
Right.
as the Troy was burning.
Hmm.
And of course, it was Aeneas himself that had to explain to everybody what happened at Troy with the Trojan
That's
horse, how
right.
they got fooled. It was never in the Iliad.
Thank you for
Um,
saying that.
yeah,
Thank you. No one knows that. Yes,
yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, you see that? It's not just the hair in the face, Winslow. I actually have
You
read a lot of bullshit
you
in my life. You see that?
know this stuff
Yeah,
inside
see
and
that?
out. Everyone
Yeah.
thinks it's in the Iliad, and it's not.
No.
It's Aeneas talking to Dido, and he says, "Sorrow, unspeakable sorrow, you ask me to bring to life once more, my queen."
So
And
here he
that's
is.
the
This is a
story.
this is a righteous. He is a moral guy that has done immoral things, your protagonist,
Hmm.
but he's primarily righteous and he's in search of something. What is he searching for in City of Dreams without giving up the plot?
A place to put his feet. A place to finally put his feet. He's got a senile father he needs to take care of. He has an infant son that he needs to take care of. And so his dream is as modest as it is impossible. He wants a normal life. He wants some security for those two people in his life. And that's what he's looking for.
Yeah.
And he accidentally finds love.
So it's an amazing story. It's one that you can't stop reading. America loves a criminal, Don.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my reaction to America. I want to get your reaction. You're a crime writer. There are so many different criminals. Why does America love a rogue, love a criminal?
Listen, we are famously a country of people who fled from other places for a variety of reasons, whether it was economic or legal or religious. So I think in America, there's always been an affinity toward the rebel soul. That's certainly true of the Irish. I think it's probably also true of the Southern Italians as well. Uh, and so, a big part of our culture, at least from the Anglo perspective, comes from the Robin Hood stories and then cowboys and all of that. I also think that there's a wish fulfillment that we all have. Do you know what I mean? You've got a big problem. It'd be nice to go to some guy with a white cat on his lap and have him take care of it. You want to get that ticket fixed. There's the noisy neighbors. Sometimes there's, far more serious problems that, thank God, most of us don't take those solutions. But I think there's a wish fulfillment, and there's a part of us, let's be honest, that would like to. And so I think that reading about people who do it is on some level attractive. I also think that crime fiction talks about humanity in extremis. It's so often about life and death. It's so often about serious issues of right and wrong, that I think people find compelling.
Yeah, it's interesting. It would be remiss of me not to talk about the former president. I think
No.
that you and I at one point had our signals crossed, but I think you finally got my vibe. I was
Yeah.
trying to help him, and I did make a mistake, which I have apologized to the American public for. We through cognitive dissonance, we
Hmm.
let too many things go. But
Yeah.
at least I have been man enough to admit that and
Right.
apologize for them. Many of my peers, which would include Pompeo or Nikki Haley
Right.
or any of these other acolytes, have not
Not at
been
all.
willing. They will not admit the mistake that was
No.
made.
Yeah.
I guess the question I have for you, because you're a crime writer, and Trump is a fully frontal criminal. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's just there's no question about it. I saw it
Right.
up close and personal, and but yet there's an appeal to a very large group of people,
Hmm.
despite what the prima facie evidence is in front of them, Don.
Yeah.
So, what your life experience as a crime writer, your life experience in the world, politics, family, what is that? Why is that?
I think you're talking about a group of people who are afraid of the future, afraid of what they're seeing. It comes out in their language,
Hmm.
replacement theory, you will not replace us. And they're frightened. And I think frightened people search for simple solutions. And Trump is a master of the elevator pitch. He's a master of those one line, simple solutions, almost all of which are horrendous and evil lies.
Yeah.
But I think that people who feel confused, feel that they're left behind. Some of them I have some sympathy for, a lot I don't, by the way.
Hmm.
That's tremendously appealing. And in
Well,
times of uncertainty, people look for that strong man.
so despite my trials and tribulations with him, I'm embarrassed to admit this to you, but I'm going to admit it to you
Come on.
because I grew up in a blue collar neighborhood, not
Yeah.
too dissimilar from the areas that you're describing in Rhode Island. There were
Mhm.
Irish and blacks and Italians. My dad was a crane operator.
I read
I
that.
would say by and large, my family is pro Trump.
Mhm.
Despite my explanation of him, his mendacity, his criminality,
Mhm.
what he's like as a human being,
Mhm.
they're pro Trump because
Mhm.
of that fear that you're talking about.
Yeah.
We went from working class economic aspiration in our country
Right.
to working class economic desperation.
Exactly.
And a result of which is a very large group of people that feel that he represents them, even though he's not offering a policy solution.
Right.
At least he's providing a finger in the eye of the establishment.
Well,
He's a metaphor for their anger.
he's acknowledging them in the ways that the Democratic Party has failed to do in a large
But
part.
used to, though. Those people
Used to.
voted for Lyndon Johnson. They voted
Exactly.
for FDR, those people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I grew up in the same way. And my mom had a Kennedy button, on my shirt when I was 6 years old. And you'd
Sure.
walk around the neighborhood making up poems about Kennedy and Nixon. I grew up in,
Right.
exactly the same way. Now, I live half the year in Rhode Island and half the year in a rural area outside of San Diego. 76% voted Republican.
Yeah,
In
there
my
you go.
little town. Now, my neighbor across the fence, old Wayne, old cowboy, he and I would have our discussions about Trump. He phoned me up 2 weeks ago and said, I'm done with him. I mean, out of the blue.
Yeah, that's starting to happen.
Yeah.
Even my buddy Sean Hannity. I grew up with Sean.
Did you
Has
really?
finally admitted to me that he went overboard with Trump, and that he, quote unquote, is starting to see things more consistent with the way I see them. I think that's as much as you're going to get out of Sean. But
Yeah.
you have any political ambitions yourself?
No,
I'm assuming
no.
not, right? No,
No,
I
absolutely.
had to ask that only because you have such a good touch for certain things that are going on.
I appreciate that, but no, none whatsoever.
My podcast is famous for our 5 words, and so I'm going to read you these 5 words,
Okay.
and then you'll react to them. Okay,
Cool.
you'll give me your reaction. Okay,
Yeah.
it can be short and sweet or long if you like.
All right.
Let's talk about tragedy, Don.
tragedy always has to do with the tragic flaw. Do you know classically that an individual has one weakness that brings him down, symbolized by the Achilles heel.
Hmm. Hmm.
I have this feeling that very often our greatest strength is simultaneously our greatest weakness. That our tragic flaw is also in some ways our heroic strength.
It's interesting. What about the universality of tragedy, meaning that as members of the human race, our humanity itself is tragic. This life is really on the road to dying,
Right.
and of
Right.
course, as a result of which we all know where we're going. I
Yep.
mean, Mel Brooks has a funny line,
Yep.
relax, none of us are getting out of here alive.
Right. Right.
But the truth of the matter, this mortality weighs on us. Could it? And obviously, it influences our behavior, right?
Sure. Listen, I think, I know now in ways I didn't used to that I have more days behind me than I have ahead of me. This never ends well, So for me, the point is, it's a cliche, is to live every day. Less and less to get too concerned about the small stuff.
Right.
You
No,
know?
exactly. Listen, I mean, all right, let me go to word number 2. You ready? Love.
I think love is an attitude. I don't listen. I fell in love at first sight, Anthony, with my wife and
Yeah, and I've seen you on social media. You guys are together 38 years, right?
38 years.
Yep,
First
congratulations.
day. Thank you. Now she wasn't instantly in love with me. I hasten to add that took a while, but for me,
Well,
it was
look, you grow on people. You wear them down, Don. What can I tell you, right? You
like
grow
a
on them.
fungus, right?
Right. Well, that's my thing. I'm a toe fungus. Now that I'm in your life, it's going to be very hard for you to get me out of your life, despite your, whatever you paint on your toe, you're still stuck with me.
You have to come up to Rhode Island. We'll hang out. We'll get you
All
some.
right, I would really enjoy that. By the
Real
way, I think,
chowder, and
I would enjoy that
I would
because
enjoy that too. We'll talk about the classics. That'd be great.
yeah, no, they're lining my wall here. These books. I mean, they were a big part of my life, because
man, that's so flattering.
my family we weren't readers in my house,
Mhm.
and so in order to get the education, I had to force myself through good discipline to start reading.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
and then I said, all right, there's 5,000 years of very smart people that are some of it the Catholic Church burnt up, frankly, but a
Right.
lot of it is still remaining. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's only 6 or 7 of Sophocles plays. I think he may have written 35 to 50 of them for all
Maybe
we know.
6 or 7 survive.
Right.
During this process, I would take online college courses
Yeah.
about all of these works, which were,
What about Elizabeth Van Diver? Have you ever heard of her?
exactly? Yes, I took Elizabeth's courses on
Okay.
each of those works, enormously useful.
You're reading and listening to the same things that I listen to.
Amazing.
I mean, so I'll give you a funny part of that. So one of my classmates at Harvard Law School, we were studying for the bar exam, and we got these tapes, and the tapes were on torts or contracts, and you'd put them into your little Sony Walkman, and
Right.
you would study. And he turned to me and said, somebody should really do this for the great professors in the universities. And so when he graduated from law school, he built something called the Great Courses.
Get out of town. I'm
Yeah.
addict
Yeah, so
on
he's-
those.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
he is, and now he's got this web app called Wondrium.
I was listening to it before I got on this interview.
Yeah, so I'm a big subscriber to Wondrium
too.
as well.
Yep.
But Elizabeth Van Diver,
Mhm.
another person I'd recommend to you if you haven't listened to him is Rufus Fears
Mhm.
on the great heroes of Greece and the great heroes of Rome.
Right.
Professor Rufus Fears is extraordinary. All right, 3 more words, sir. Then I'm going to get you out of here. Are you ready?
Okay.
Conflict.
The essence of crime fiction, the essence of all fiction. No conflict, no story.
Corruption.
An American way of life.
Yeah, but really a way of human life, no?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
listen, I think we can get very, oh my God, my vocabulary has gone to hell. Sanctimonious about
Yeah.
corruption.
Right.
But let's be aware that there's a certain kind of corruption that has made the world run, and in some cases made it
Yeah.
run better than it was.
So one of my maid friends said to me that American corruption is when you actually bribe the person and they do the thing for you. He says the Chinese corruption is you bribe the person and they don't do it for you.
Do it for you. That's
Okay.
so
And he
true,
says,
yeah.
ultimately, if we start having corruption that doesn't work, it's going to be more damaging to the society. Anyway, it's a very cynical view. But
Yeah.
my last word for you, which is you understand about as well as anybody, is the word crime.
Yeah. Crime is a fungible concept. We have a certain kind of crime, but then there's sort of massive economic crimes that are committed against entire classes of people. And our concept of crime changes all the time. So you have people in prison now serving time for offenses. I guess air quoting on the podcast doesn't work. Offenses that are no longer crimes.
Right.
So when we say crime, it's not like that's carved in marble.
Yeah,
It used to be a crime to run numbers in the neighborhood, right?
Right.
You probably remember those people.
Well, they still exist, believe it or not. There's still cash only restaurants where I live because of that, right? They're
Of course.
they're laundering the
Of course.
their offenses. They're laundering their offenses done.
Right.
Okay.
But Shaw said, any crime society can't control, they turn into a virtue.
Yeah.
And so now we have, the lottery. And
Of course.
It's a good thing.
No, I mean, how quote unquote helping the education system, right?
Right.
Before I let you go, let's talk about T.J. Newman, who is a mentee of yours. She's written 2 phenomenal books, and I've got her coming up on my podcast. So
you'll have a good time.
I'd like you to tell us a little bit about her, and then I'd like you to come up with a question that I need to ask her that, of course, I wouldn't be able to ask her if I didn't know Don Winslow.
Well, let me see if I can do that. First, let me describe TJ. I mean, she was a flight attendant for many years, trying to get published unsuccessfully. She's a terrific writer, an extraordinarily nice person, smart person, funny person. Listen, Tej never needed my help learning how to write. Let me be very clear about that, okay? What Tej needed, I call her Tej, TJ, what she needed was a little help on the business side, and so basically, my job was putting her and my agent, our agent, Shane Salerno, together. Shane also is a A-list screenwriter in his own wrote little movies rather, like Armageddon and all the sequels to Avatar and that kind of thing. And then Shane got her the right kind of publication and the right kind of deals. What you might want to ask, depending on how you're feeling in your podcast on that particular day, is ask TJ for her grossest airline flight attendant story.
Okay, well, I'm going to be asking that, okay? The grossest
moment she experienced on an airplane, and then sit back.
All right, see, this is value added from Don Winslow.
Yeah, come on. I'm here to help.
You've got another book coming out, the final book in the Danny Ryan trilogy, City in Ruins, is coming out in 2024.
Yep.
Anything else you're thinking about publishing?
No.
All right, well,
I'm retiring, to focus on some of the issues that we were discussing.
And I think you've got Elvis Presley coming up, right? He's going to be the protagonist.
Yes.
Right?
Austin Butler will be playing
incredible
Danny Ryan.
Austin Butler.
Yep. I've got a TV series coming out that's based on my 3 big fat drug books. Called The Border on FX. I just watched the pilot yesterday.
Cool. Yeah, no, I read The Border. That was a great airline. You talk about an airline read. Yeah. Savages and The Border. I think I picked those up in the airports as I was traveling around.
Yeah, good for you, because I was told for 25 years that I was not an airport author.
Yeah. No, they're in the airports, and I took
they are.
So this book, City of Dreams, is a fantastic novel. There's a rite of passage in this book. It's a journey. But I think the most compelling thing about your writing is that you identify what people are really like. I had Robert Greene on a few months back on the laws of human nature, the 48 laws of power. And we we pretend that we're somebody that we're actually not. There's this, what did Hermann Hesse once said, there's an abraxas in our personalities. There's a good and an evil, like he wrote in the story Damien.
Yep.
And it's the best among us can control the evil parts and excel at the good parts, which of course you do a great job of, Mr. Winslow. Thank you very much for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you for
Enjoyed
having
it.
me. Listen, I've really enjoyed this.